Somewhere along the way, you started doing the math. You looked at your age. You looked at where you are. You looked at the distance between the life you are living and the life you always believed you were capable of living, and you did the calculation that millions of people do in the quiet of their 40s and 50s and 60s. You told yourself it was too late to start over, too late to reinvent, too late to build the thing you always knew you were capable of building, too late to become the version of yourself that you have been carrying around as a private, quietly protected dream for longer than you can remember. I am here to tell you, with complete certainty, backed by documented psychology, documented neuroscience, and the recorded lives of the most impactful people in human history, that the math you did was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, provably, completely wrong. And in the next several minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why the chapter you thought was closing is actually the most powerful chapter of your entire life. Stay with me, because this one changes everything. What this feels like from the inside. Let me describe something, and I want you to tell me if this is accurate. You are not where you thought you would be at this point in your life. Not in a dramatic, catastrophic way, just in that quiet, private, persistent way that lives in the background of ordinary days. The career that went in a different direction than you planned. The version of yourself you were building in your 30s that somehow got set aside by circumstances, by responsibility, by the accumulating weight of a life that required your attention in other places. And now you find yourself in a moment, maybe it arrived gradually, maybe it arrived all at once, where you are looking at the years ahead and asking a question that you have never asked quite so directly before. Is there still time to build the thing, to become the person, to write the chapter that feels like it belongs to who you actually are, rather than who the circumstances of your life required you to be? And beneath that question, beneath the surface of it, there's a fear that most people your age carry in private and almost never say out loud. What if I already missed it? What if the window closed while I was busy doing everything else? I want to address that fear directly, not with reassurance, not with the kind of motivational language that sounds good for 20 minutes and evaporates by morning, with facts, with documented evidence, with the actual recorded truth of what human beings are capable of, and when they're capable of it. Because the fear is understandable, but the fear is wrong. Here is a fact that most people never hear, and it permanently changes the way you understand your own timeline. The human brain does not peak in its 20s. It peaks in multiple critical areas of cognition, judgment, emotional intelligence, and creative synthesis between the ages of 40 and 65. What that means is that the years you are in right now are not your decline, they are your peak. The neuroscience, your brain, right now. Neuroscientist Deborah Burke at Pomona College and researcher Timothy Salthouse at the University of Virginia spent decades studying how the human brain changes across a lifetime. What their combined research revealed permanently disrupted the assumption that cognitive ability peaks early and declines from there. Yes, certain narrow processing speeds decline with age. Reaction time slows slightly. The ability to rapidly memorize arbitrary information reduces. But the capacities that actually determine the quality and impact of human achievement, the ones that separate people who build things that matter from people who simply move quickly, those capacities do not decline in midlife. They expand. Crystallized intelligence, the Bastille, the ability to synthesize experience, recognize patterns, make nuanced judgments, and apply deep contextual understanding to complex problems, increases steadily through the 40s, 50s, and into the 60s. Emotional regulation, the ability to make decisions from a place of genuine clarity rather than reactive anxiety, peaks in midlife and remains strong well into the 7th decade of life. The capacity for what researchers call integrative thinking, the ability to hold multiple complex ideas simultaneously and find connections between them that younger, faster minds miss entirely, is measurably stronger at 50 than it was at 25. You're not past your prime, you're in it. The version of yourself that exists right now, with everything you have experienced, everything you have survived, everything you have learned in the decades of your life, is the most cognitively capable, the most emotionally equipped, and the most genuinely prepared version of you that has ever existed. The only question is what you are going to do with that. Think about the most important decision you ever made. Now think about how old you were when you made it. I am willing to bet it was not in your 20s. The best decisions of most people's lives, the truest ones, the ones that came from genuine self-knowledge rather than borrowed ambition, were made in their 40s and beyond. That is not an accident. That is the brain, operating at the depth it spent decades building toward. The historical pattern, the ones who started late. Let me give you documented historical facts, not motivational stories but recorded evidence. Vera Wang did not design her first dress until she was 40 years old. She had spent her 30s as a figure skater and then a fashion editor, building a depth of aesthetic understanding and professional experience that became the foundation of one of the most recognized names in fashion design in the world. Julia Child did not publish her first cookbook until she was 49. She spent her 40s learning to cook in France, building the specific, hard-won, deeply personal mastery that no 20-year-old could have possessed. The work she produced from that mastery permanently changed American culinary culture. Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species at 50, after decades of patient, private, meticulous observation that only someone with his accumulated depth of experience could have conducted and synthesized. Colonel Sanders was 62 years old when he franchised Kentucky Fried Chicken, after a lifetime of varied experience, failure, reinvention, and the specific kind of practical wisdom that only decades of living can produce. Grandma Moses, Anna Mary Robertson. Moses began her painting career at 78. She became one of the most celebrated American folk artists of the 20th century. She lived and painted until she was 101. I am not telling you these stories to suggest that age is irrelevant. I am telling you these stories because they reveal a pattern that operates consistently across disciplines, across centuries, across every domain of human achievement. The people who built the most enduring, most impactful, most genuinely original things were almost never the youngest people in the room. They were the ones who had lived long enough to have something real to say. You have lived long enough. You have something real to say. The second chapter is not your consolation prize for a first chapter that did not go as planned. It is the chapter that everything before it was preparing you to write. Before we move into part 2, one question in the comments, one word. What does the life you have always believed you were capable of living feel like from the inside? The one you have been quietly carrying. Just one word. Leave it below. Because there are thousands of people watching this right now who are carrying that same word, and they need to know they are not carrying it alone. Before we enter part 2, I want to speak to you directly for just a moment. Creating this content, the research, the depth, the careful transmission of these truths, takes an enormous amount of time and dedication. If this message has reached something real in you today, please consider supporting this work. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or find the support link in the pinned comment below. I have also prepared a free companion guidance PDF for this series, practical exercises that go deeper than what we can cover in the video alone. Download it using the link in the pinned comment. And if you are standing at a serious crossroads right now, in your career, your sense of direction, or your understanding of what the next chapter of your life is supposed to look like, and you need a personal, direct blueprint built specifically for your situation, my private video readings are open for you through the link in the description. Your support keeps this work alive and this message reaching the people who need it most. Now, part 2 is waiting, and what comes next will show you the exact psychological architecture of reinvention, how it actually works, why it works better in midlife than at any other point, and what the people who successfully wrote their second chapter did differently from the ones who stayed stuck in the story they had already lived. Let's keep going. Part 2. The Architecture of Reinvention. Every version of your life that did not work out was teaching you something that the version that does work out will require. Not as comfort, as architecture. Every career that plateaued, every relationship that ended, every plan that failed, every version of your future that you built carefully and then watched collapse. None of it was wasted. None of it was detour. All of it was construction material for the chapter that is waiting to be written right now. And I'm going to show you, at the level of your psychology, at the level of your neuroscience, at the level of the documented mechanics of how human reinvention actually works, exactly why everything you have been through has not disqualified you from your second chapter. It has specifically, precisely, irreplaceably equipped you for it. Let's build the map. The psychology. Why reinvention works better in midlife. Psychologist Erikson, one of the most influential developmental psychologists of the 20th century, spent his career mapping the psychological stages of human life. What his research identified about midlife permanently changed how developmental psychologists understand the second half of human existence. Erikson identified what he called the crisis of generativity versus stagnation, the central psychological challenge of midlife. This is the period in which a person confronts, often for the first time with genuine urgency, the question of what their life is actually for. Not what it is for in the abstract, what it is for in practice, in the specific choices they make about where they invest their remaining time, energy, and capability. People who resolve this crisis toward generativity, who find and commit to a purpose that extends beyond their own comfort and survival, do not just feel better. They demonstrably perform better. They build more. They create more lasting impact. They report higher levels of satisfaction, meaning, and genuine engagement with their lives than at any previous point. People who resolve it toward stagnation, who retreat into the safety of the familiar, who decide that the window has closed and the best available option is to manage the decline comfortably, experience the opposite, not peace, a persistent, low-grade, quietly devastating sense of unlived potential that Erikson described as one of the most painful psychological conditions a human being can inhabit. The crossroads you are standing at right now is not a sign that something went wrong. It is the arrival of the most important psychological invitation of your entire life. And the invitation is this: what is your second chapter actually going to be about? Here is the most dangerous lie that midlife tells, that starting over means losing everything you have already built. It does not. Starting your second chapter does not erase your first one. It stands on it. It uses every year of experience, every hard-won lesson, every scar and skill and piece of hard-earned understanding as the foundation it builds from. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from everything. The Neuroscience, the Midlife Creative Surge, Cohen, neurologist and pioneering researcher in the field of adult development at George Washington University, spent decades studying what happens to human creativity and productivity in the second half of life. His findings, published in his landmark work, The Creative Age, overturned virtually every assumption his field had previously held about aging and capability. Cohen identified what he called the midlife developmental intelligence, a specific cluster of cognitive and psychological capacities that emerge, strengthen, and reach their fullest expression in the decades between 40 and 70. The first component he identified was what he called relativistic thinking, the ability to hold complexity, ambiguity, and contradiction simultaneously without being destabilized by it. Young minds tend toward binary thinking, right or wrong, success or failure, possible or impossible. Midlife minds develop the capacity to navigate nuance, to work productively in the grey areas where the most interesting and most impactful work actually happens. The second component was what Cohen called the liberation phase, a psychological shift that occurs in midlife in which people become significantly less concerned with social approval, significantly less constrained by fear of judgment, and significantly more willing to take the creative and professional risks that they spent their earlier years avoiding. In plain language, you care less about what people think, and that, in terms of creative output and genuine achievement, is one of the most liberating and productive psychological states a human being can occupy. The third component was what Cohen called summing up, the drive to synthesize everything you have learned, experienced, and understood across a lifetime into something that expresses it fully. Not a summary of the past, a distillation of it into something new, something that carries the full weight of everything you have lived, into a form that can be shared, built, and left behind. This is the engine of the second chapter. Not youth, not speed, not the unburdened optimism of someone who has not yet learned what things cost. The deep, synthesized, liberated, fully equipped intelligence of someone who has lived enough to know exactly what they are doing and why it matters. That is you. Right now. The world spends an enormous amount of energy telling people over 40 that their best days are behind them. The neuroscience says the opposite. The question is which voice you're going to listen to. The reinvention architecture. What actually happens here is the full picture of how successful second chapters are actually built, based on the documented patterns of the people who built them. The first thing that happens is not a plan. It is a permission. The single most consistent barrier between midlife people and their second chapter is not lack of capability, lack of time, or lack of opportunity. It is the absence of internal permission to begin. The deeply ingrained belief installed by decades of cultural messaging, by the math they did in the quiet moments, by the voices that told them the window was closing, that starting something genuinely new at this point in life is either irresponsible, unrealistic, or simply too late. Removing that belief now replacing it with blind optimism, but replacing it with the actual documented evidence of what people at your stage of life are genuinely capable of, is the first architectural move of the second chapter. The second thing that happens is a ruthless clarity about what the first chapter actually taught you. Not what you wish it had taught you, not the lessons you performed for other people, the actual, specific, hard-won understanding that only your particular combination of experiences, failures, recoveries, and accumulations could have produced, the wisdom that is genuinely, irreplaceably yours. Because that wisdom, that specific, personal, deeply earned understanding, is the raw material of everything your second chapter will be built from. And the third thing that happens is a single first step. Not a plan, not a strategy, not a complete roadmap from where you are to where you are going. One first step, taken today, in the direction of the chapter that has been waiting. In part 3, the final and most practical part of this series, I am going to give you 3 specific disciplines that will help you take that first step and every step after it with full intention, full clarity, and the specific kind of momentum that builds on itself until the second chapter is not just a hope, but an undeniable, visible, already in motion reality. Quick reminder before part 3, the free companion PDF for this series is in the pinned comment below. It contains the written exercises that go with everything we are covering, designed so you can do this work practically, not just listen to it. Download it now so it is ready when we finish. Part 3 is the most powerful part. 3 disciplines, starting today. Let's finish this. Part 3, how to write the second chapter. You made it to part 3. And I want to say something before we begin that with complete sincerity. The fact that you are here, that you watched through 2 full parts of this series, tells me something specific about you. It tells me that the second chapter is not an abstract concept for you. It is something you have been thinking about, something you have been carrying, something that has been asking for your attention for longer than you may have admitted to yourself. You are not ready in the sense that everything is in place and the conditions are perfect. Ready in the sense that the person you need to be to begin the second chapter, equipped, experienced, clear-eyed, and finally free enough from the need for external permission to take the first step. That person is already here. They have been here for a while. In part 1, we established the truth. The chapter you thought was closing is actually the most powerful chapter of your life. In part 2, we understood why, the neuroscience, the psychology, the documented architecture of midlife reinvention. Now, in part 3, we are going to talk about how. 3 disciplines, specific, practical, designed for the life you are actually living, not an ideal version with unlimited time and zero responsibility. Let's write the chapter. Discipline 1. The Legacy Inventory. The first discipline is called the Legacy Inventory, and it begins with a question that most people in midlife have never asked themselves with genuine precision. What do I actually know? Not what your resume says you know, not what your job title suggests you know. What you actually, specifically, deeply know, from the accumulated experience of everything you have lived, survived, built, lost, recovered from, and learned across the decades of your life. Here is how the legacy inventory works. You take a piece of paper and you write down 5 things that you understand, genuinely, deeply, from lived experience, that a 25-year-old could not understand. Not because they are less intelligent, but because they have not lived enough yet to know what you know. Maybe it is how organizations actually function beneath their official structures. Maybe it is how people behave under pressure and why. Maybe it is how certain industries work from the inside. Maybe it is how grief transforms people. Maybe it is how to build something from nothing with limited resources. Maybe it is how to navigate complexity without losing your integrity. Write 5 things, specific, concrete, deeply personal things that only your particular combination of experiences could have taught you. Then, next to each one, write who needs to know this. Not who you think would be interested, who genuinely needs it, who is struggling with something that this specific knowledge of yours could help them navigate, who is in the early stages of something that your hard-won understanding could accelerate for them. Because here is what the legacy inventory reveals, that nothing else can. Your second chapter is almost never built from something entirely new. It is almost always built from the deepest, most personal, most hard-earned parts of your first chapter, taken out of the private space where they have been living and brought into a form that serves others. The wisdom you have been carrying is not just for you. It never was. The legacy inventory shows you exactly what it is and exactly who it is for. The thing you know so well that you have stopped thinking of it as special, the thing that feels ordinary to you because you have lived with it for so long, is extraordinary to someone who has not lived what you have lived. Your experience is not background noise. It is the content of your second chapter. Discipline 2. The one-door practice. The second discipline is called the one-door practice, and it is the simplest and most immediately actionable thing in this entire series. Every single day, without exception, without negotiation, without waiting for the right moment or the perfect conditions, you open one door toward the second chapter. Not a big door, not a dramatic gesture. One door. Make one phone call to someone whose work is adjacent to the direction you are moving. Write one page of the thing you know needs to be written. Research one opportunity that is relevant to what you are building. Have one honest conversation about what you actually want the next chapter to look like, with yourself in writing, where you cannot be polite or vague about it. Take one class, read one chapter, apply for one thing, one door, every day. Here is why this works at a level that goes deeper than productivity advice. The greatest barrier to the second chapter is not external. It is the internal story that says the gap between where you are and where the second chapter lives is too large to cross, that the distance is too far, that the starting point is too late. The one-door practice dismantles that story one day at a time, because every door you open, no matter how small, is irrefutable evidence that you are already moving. That the second chapter is not a future event. It is a present reality that you are actively constructing, one door at a time, starting today. And the accumulated evidence of consistent daily movement, built up over weeks and months, does something to the internal story that no amount of motivation or inspiration can replicate. It makes the story of too late factually impossible to maintain, because you are already building. And people who are already building are never too late. They are simply in the early stages of something the world has not yet seen. You have been waiting for permission to begin. I want to be very clear about something. The permission was never coming from outside. It was always yours to give. And the moment you open the first door, not tomorrow, not when conditions improve today, you have given it. Discipline 3, the second chapter, statement. The third discipline is the one that will do more to accelerate your second chapter than anything else in this series. It is called the second chapter statement, and you write it once, refine it over time, and return to it every single morning before the day begins. Here is how you write it. You sit down with a piece of paper and you complete 4 sentences. The first sentence, the specific thing I have lived through that nobody else has lived through in exactly the same way, is. The second sentence, the specific thing I now understand because of everything I have lived through is. The third sentence, the specific person or group of people who needs what I now understand is. The fourth sentence, the specific thing I am going to build from this understanding is. 4 sentences, written with complete honesty, without performing modesty, and without performing ambition. Just the truth of what you have, what you know, who needs it, and what you are going to do with it. This is your second chapter statement. It is not a mission statement in the corporate sense. It is a private, personal, precise declaration of what the next chapter of your life is actually going to be about, written in your own words, from your own experience, in the specific language that only you could use to describe something that only you could build. Read it every morning, not as an affirmation, as a reminder. A reminder of the direction you have chosen, the reason you have chosen it, and the specific, irreplaceable value that only you, with everything you have lived and learned and survived, can bring to it. Over time, over weeks and months of returning to this statement and refining it as the chapter develops, it becomes something more than a reminder. It becomes a compass, and a person with a compass and a clear, personally earned, deeply specific sense of direction is not lost. They are navigating, and navigation, unlike wandering, always arrives somewhere. The honest close. Before close this series, I want to say one thing that I believe matters more than everything else we have covered. The years you have lived were not wasted, even the ones that hurt, even the ones that went wrong, even the ones where you ended up somewhere you never planned to be, carrying things you never planned to carry, looking at a version of your life that looked nothing like what you imagined. None of it was wasted, because all of it, every year, every loss, every recovery, every hard-won lesson, became the raw material of something that no one younger, no one less experienced, no one who has not lived exactly what you have lived could build. Your second chapter. It is not too late. It is exactly on time. And the most important thing you can do right now, not tomorrow, not when circumstances improve, right now, is to pick up the pen. The chapter is waiting to be written, and only you can write it. If this series reached something real in you, if it named the chapter you have been carrying, do one thing. Think of one person in your life right now who is in their 40s, 50s, or 60s and has quietly convinced themselves that their best chapter is behind them. Send them this, not for the channel, for them, because the right words at the right moment do not just comfort a person, they redirect them toward everything they were still capable of building. The free companion PDF, with all the written exercises for this series, is in the pinned comment below. Download it. The work continues there. Subscribe, because the next chapter goes even deeper. I will see you in the next one.